Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chancellor, distinguished members in the audience. Forgive me for not mentioning everybody's name to take away some time. I find it's a great honor for me to be here. Not because UDCT is great, or ICT, sorry, is great. It is great. But because of my own background and experience with chemistry and chemical engineering. I was a good student, if I may be slightly immodest, but somehow I preferred physics and mathematics to chemistry. When I did physics honors, not chemistry honors. And we had an organic chemistry teacher called Hiten Mukherjee, God bless his soul. And he used to teach organic chemistry as though it is Rabindra Sangeet. In a deep, sonorous voice, he'll go up and down. And it had a little soporific effect on my rather young mind. As a result of which, I joined the group of students who would be fooling around in the class. And Professor Hiten Mukherjee one day cursed us. Cursed is a strong word. He said, if you don't follow what I am teaching you, one day you will regret it. And we laughed it off. And when I finished my physics honors, I wanted to study engineering. I thought of entering UDCT, as it was then called, because my father was in Bombay. But the attraction in 1964 of studying something which is completely different and new, which is computer science and electronics, was too strong. So I went to IIT. And I said, Professor Hiten Mukherjee is wrong. I don't need to know anything about chemistry. As it's so turned out, my career is now 50 years. And throughout my career, I've been associated with companies which are in one form or another in the chemical industry. And Professor Hiten Mukherjee's sonorous voice keeps coming back to me that one day you'll regret not paying attention in my class. I spent 30 years in Hindustan Lever, whose basic background is in chemistry and chemical engineering. I then went to Tata's and they gave me Tata Chemicals, they gave me Rallies. So I was back into the chemistry and I got a startup which is in the pharmaceutical industry and drug delivery. So in one form or another, I have stood to regret not having paid attention in my organic chemistry class in 1962. And that a premier institution like the ICT should invite me helps my soul at a growing age to feel a little relaxed that maybe I can just get away with this. So I'm very, very grateful to be here. Of course, I did not know Professor Naba, but those who knew him have spoken of him with great feeling, emotion, and eloquence. And I would just add my tributes to a person whom I did not know, but who's clearly been an institution builder. And I have a great interest in institution builders because there's a distinction between an institution builder and the leader of a company or of an organization. Institution builders build for the long term. They build successors. And we just heard the story from you. You want to go there? Is it easier? Can't hear. Institution builders build successors. And I've been very lucky to work in companies where this was practiced very well. And the very delightful story that you just mentioned about how Professor M.M. Sharma was seduced or instructed, as the case may be, to come back to this institute. And his sterling contributions are some things I've seen during my career. I would like to pay my tribute. It's also a great pleasure because I said, I don't know anybody in this ICT, and it's only the enormous pressure that Kishore Mariwala is able to generate without a compressor behind him that caused me to say, maybe I will go. But I've always wondered how brilliant Professor Navar may be because I had the privilege of working with his daughter in Tata's. And every time I looked at this poet, literature lady, I said, my God, I wonder where she got her brains from. And now I think I've got the picture. The loop is complete. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I want to start my little oration with a little story. Actually, everything I'm going to tell you is a story. But they're not like the ones you hear in the political field. They're all true stories. Because you're never sure in the public discourse which is true and which is not. About the time, or just before UDCT was started in 1933, which was the year, incidentally, when Hitler won the election in Germany. I don't know if you're aware. I'm not making a connection between the two, but it just so happens so. But a few years before that, a young Japanese boy was born in his village near Osaka. And when he was 17 or 18 years old, his joined the Japanese Red Army, which was a sort of a kamikaze type of, they're made to die. And he was airdropped after his training on an island called Lubang in the Philippines. So just think of it, 1942, 1943, 16, 17, 18-year-old Japanese boy, muscular, tough, been trained in warfare, and he has been put into the Lubang, and he was given, I presume, a 707 rifle, and he was told to stay in the forest and look out for the enemy, and certain training was given for that. His name was Hiro Onoda, and Hiro Onoda stayed in the forest from 1942 till 1972 without being aware that the Second World War was over. And every morning, having sworn allegiance to the Japanese emperor, he would get up in the morning, do his ablutions, take out his gun, put grease on it, try it out, do his drills, and he would look around. Where is the enemy? And all attempts by the authorities to tell him that the war was over did not reach him. Finally, through the radar system, they located a person. They thought it was Hiro Onoda, and his former commanding officer, who by this time was quite old, arrived in the forest and told Hiro Onoda, it's me. And he said, yeah, but what happened to the war? He said, the war was over 30 years ago. And Hiro Onoda was a hero. He came back to Tokyo, and he led a retired life. He became a hero in Japan for his commitment to duty. And then he died just 2-3 years ago. And that's when his obituary was written. And the reason why the Hiro Onoda story struck me is many institutions are populated with Hiro Onodas. I'm also a Hiro Onoda. And many of the people here, I assume, without being conscious of it, are also Hiro Onodas. Which means that they are working very hard, they are very alert and looking for the enemy, but the world is moving on and they are not part of it. And because that's essentially the lesson of Hiro Onoda. So we spend our time in our companies, in our institutes, looking at what are the threats, making 5-year plans, but we miss the wood for the trees. And therefore it came to me as a great example of how you can be really dedicated, really loyal, working hard, and yet miss the wood for the trees. And it got me very interested in the subject, therefore, which is the captioned subject for today. What happens when you're trying to transform an institution? How can you miss it when it's so obvious under your nose? Institutions are like human beings. There is the birth, there is the rise, and there is a decay. And you try to prevent the decay by doing some things to keep it refreshed and renewed. But there's no mistaking the parabolic pattern, asymmetric parabola, because the rise is very fast and the decay is very slow, painfully slow. So I went back to history and said, what happens to the great dynasties of the world? before I get locked into companies and corporate sector. And I got hold of some books, and with the help of some of my friends who were more professional historians than I started to study the Ottoman Empire, the Ming Dynasty, the Mughal Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire. I don't want to give you the impression that I am an expert on all of these empires, but I did enough study and summarized the view of scholars without myself being a scholar, which told me what is the standard pattern in institutional decay, rise and decay. And when I studied this, I said this applies to institutions. It applies to Tatas, it applies to Hindustan Lever, it applies to ICT, it applies to a nation. And I therefore developed a nice presentation with PowerPoint charts. In fact, I was very tempted to use that today. But then I said, we get too many PowerPoint charts. If somebody says, what's your name? You produce a PowerPoint chart. How old are you? You produce a PowerPoint chart. So I decided I'm going to speak to you rather than present to you. And I hope, Padmaji, that is fine. I want to structure whatever I want to say, and I promise you I will shut up in the right time. And if I'm talking too much, you can give me a little jolt from the back. What are the summarized lessons of history? Because ICT should never assume, I'm mentioning ICT not because I know there's a decay going on, but it's inevitable that some decay is going on. It's like the human body. Anybody who says, my body is not decaying, is either Baba Ramdev or he's gone nuts. So there's decay going on all the time. That's the nature of the world and nature. So what are the lessons of history? The second is the lessons of longevity. And I'm currently engaged in writing a book which is called Corporate Ayurveda. How can companies learn to live long? And finally, I would like to close by a couple of experiences and anecdotes. I've got enough anecdotes to keep you here till midnight. But the good news is I'm not going to do that because they are illustrative and not instructive. I would like to believe that a lecture which is short in memory of a great leader like Professor Naber should stimulate young people's thinking rather than instruct them as to how they should be dealing with things tomorrow. First, the lessons of history, which is not the normal subject of engineers or people with a technical background. And I think it's one of the serious limitations of our technical education, that we train people with no sense of the arts, the literature. And I can understand there are so many things to learn in engineering that there's no time to deal with that. But I hope we are not turning out students like the way I came out of IIT with actual contempt for arts and literature. I have to admit, I've worn out of that now. But I actually thought God made engineers and He made others not specified. But I've changed my view of the world. But that is the way my mind used to be when I was younger.